Wi-Fi is no bueno for streaming. All right, so let's get to it. Last time we were working on the tic-tac-toe thing, and we hadn't quite finished, so let's go back into that. So this is, I think, make sure that's what we had. Yes, okay, so this is where we were last time, right? And we had this sort of somewhat janky solution to check who we've overlapped. I did it a different way with the other group, and the link to that version is on Canvas, just like the link to this version, so you can kind of see how I did it. Okay, so I think what we were working on last time was at the end was dealing with how do we check whether or not somebody has won the game, or whether or not the game is in a tie state where nobody can go. Okay, so what we did was we started with here this little block, which is well, not really little, but what we were trying to do was say, okay, if all three of, say, the top rows are the same, okay, and none of them are 0, then that means that somebody has won, okay? So I'm actually going to plot this thing out, and we'll actually build a function for this to do it. So let's go to advanced, and we'll go to functions, and we're going to call CheckWin of number. Okay, now the reason that I've made here so functions, let's back up a minute. Oh, when I'm not on the full screen, of course. Functions in our context can take in input values, and they can return output values, but they don't have to, right? So you can have a function that really, like for example, my MakeTile function that we did over here, all this is basically saying, okay, that big pile of commands has the shorthand name MakeTiles. And so if you say do MakeTiles, then it's going to just do everything in that list. And then when it's done, it'll go to the next thing in the list, which is set up the cursor sprite. Okay, so there's a function that has no inputs and no outputs. We don't really talk about those functions in math world, but they're certainly valid here. But a function can also take in an input value. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the CheckWin function take in a value and say, okay, let me check if player 1 has won versus player 2 has won. And the reason I want to do that is I kind of need to know who won, right, in order to display that information to the user. So the fact that somebody has won is great, but I still need to know who won. Make sense? Okay, and so what that means is that really we have the 16 cases to check, not just the 8. But checking whether or not the first player has won on the top row is the same work as doing it for the second player, right? So if I write this code sort of in a slightly generic way, I can recycle it, save some time, and be lazy, okay? Does that kind of make sense? So this is why I'm going to pass to this function a number, and this number will either be 1 or 2, and so what I'll be doing is checking, hey, did player 1 win, yes or no? And hey, did player 2 win, yes or no? Okay, well, so we'll use the function twice. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, okay. So at this point then, I'll have to redo this chunk of code slightly, because what we want, right, is an if statement And under what conditions does a player win? Yeah, they've got 3 in a row, and there's 8 ways that could happen, right? 3 rows, 3 columns, and 2 diagonals. Okay, so unfortunately, part of this is going to be a bunch of copying and pasting, but yeah, okay. So what we'll do here is, let me go to logic, and I'm going to need to check whether or not some things are equal. Okay, I also need the and Boolean block. So those are going to be sort of the 2, and then let me plop out that guy there. Okay, and then get rid of, well, I'll need these 2. Okay, so so the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to say, all right, tile 1 has a state, and it's a number. And I want to check if it equals the number that I'm inputting to the function. Okay, and the number that I'm going to input into the function is either going to be the number 1 or 2, corresponding to player 1 or player 2. So this little block will say, is tile 1's state equal to the number that I pass to it, which will, like I said, either be 1 or 2. Okay. If I hard-coded this to be the number 1 or the number 2, I would have to make 2 copies of this thing. But by making it depend on a variable, then I only have to make 1 copy, and I can just use it twice. Okay, so see, that's brilliant. Or what was it on those Guinness commercials from like maybe 10 years ago? Brilliant! No? Maybe it's more like 15 years ago. Whatever. Not that you guys watch commercials anymore anyway, right? You know, there was a time before DVRs, and it was a dark time. Okay, so that does tile 1, and then what allows the player to win? Well, 1, 2, and 3 all being the same. Then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and all the other combinations. Okay, so this part is going to be, unfortunately, a little lame. So I'm going to copy this thing twice, get rid of this. You go away. Okay. Oops. I wanted the whole thing. Okay. But the top row is 1, 2, 3. Okay? And then I just need to check, are all of these, oops, not a comment, duplicate, are all 3 of these things true? So I'll just plop that one here, and this one, oops, this one here. Actually, let's put it here so they're in order. And then this last one, and then all of this goes there. Okay, so, and then that I put in the, there. Okay. Okay, make sense? All right, so then suppose that all 3 of those things are the same number, and that number is either 1 or 2, then that means that one of the players is 1, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new variable here, and I'm going to call this variable game state, okay? And I'm going to set the game state initially to 0, and I'm going to think of 0 as in the game is currently being played, okay? And then I'm going to think of game state of 1 as being that player 1 just was victorious, and game state 2 to be player 2 was victorious. So if I have 3 in a row, then what I'm going to do is set the game state to the value num. Okay, because remember, num that I'm passing to this function is either the number 1 or 2. Okay, does that make sense? And so if player 1 has 1, then game state 1 is the thing, right? So there's there's a logic to choosing the numbers that they all kind of match. Okay, and if player 2 won by having the top row, then it would set the game state to 2, and then later we'll have to do something where it says, okay, game state of 2, player 2 won, display something and whatnot. Okay, but we'll add that later. Okay, so does that kind of make sense? All right, so what do we have to do with this thing, this little if thing? Not 15, but only 7, fortunately. Right, because I'm passing the number to it, so it can sort of do double duty. Okay, but we do have to copy it 7 times, and then tweak it for each of the other different winning configurations. Okay, so right now we've got it checking tiles 1, 2, and 3. That's the top row. Then we'll do 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and all the other combinations. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so this part's kind of lame because it's just going to be copying and pasting a bunch. But c'est la vie. Okay, so 1, 2, get rid of this. 3, oops, dang it. 4, 5, 6. Oh, and be careful about the nesting. Okay, so there we go. All right, and now we just need to modify them all. So this first one was 1, 2, 3. Then we need to do 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9. Okay, then we're on the columns. So what are the columns? 1, 4, and 7, right? Okay, so that would be this one. This one. 1, 4, and 7. Okay, then 2, 5, and 8. And then 3, 6, and 9. Okay, so that gets us the 3 columns. Okay, and then last we've got the 2 diagonals. So the first one is going to, this way diagonal would be 1, 5, and 9. Okay, so 1, 5, and 9. And then the back diagonal would be what? 3, 5, 7. Okay. Okay. So that gets all of the 8 different cases of winning, and really all the 16 because this function can do double duty. Okay, now, we haven't, all we've done so far is to define a function, but we haven't actually called the function, okay? So where should we call the function? I would say, well, there's 2 places we could put it. One would be after the A button is pressed, would be a logical place to do this because that's when somebody is changing potentially the state of the game, okay? So let's do it after this little green block. So what we'll do is we'll call CheckWin of 1, and we'll also call then CheckWin of 2. Okay, what do we do if CheckWin of 1 so I need one of these, and I need one of these. Okay, so what does CheckWin of 1 do? It checks whether player 1 has won, okay? And if so, what does it set the game state variable to be? 1, okay? So what I can do is say, if the variable game state equals 1, then that means that player 1 has won, okay? What should we do if player 1 wins? I mean, that's up to us as a sort of design decision, but what should happen? The game should end, and we should probably tell the user or the players that it's over and player 1 has won, and yay, and put confetti all over the place or something, okay? So let's do that under, I think it's under game. Let's splash, which just puts up the text in the middle. We'll splash player 1 wins, and then the game's over. So let's reset the game. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'll put that here after we check whether or not player 1 wins. And then similarly, if player 2 wins, then I'll just change this to 2 and say player 2 wins, and same thing, right? So we're just checking whether or not both players have won, or either player has won. Okay. All right, so does that make sense? Yeah? So this function these two functions will get called when somebody hits the A button. And since the A button is how you're changing the state of the game in the first place, that's sort of a place to put it. It's not the only way you could do it. You could put it in an on-game update loop, in which case it would continually run. This is maybe slightly more efficient, but yeah. Okay. I'm trying to do with each of the sections, right, deliberately do things differently so that you guys can see multiple versions of the same code. Okay, Gucci? All right, so let's test it out. Okay, so if memory serves, right? Okay, player 1 wins. And you saw how it, well, here, let me do that again. You see how it, the splash thing, it's got this little A key right there? Okay, it basically, when it's in a text mode like that, everything else is sort of paused. So you have to hit the A key for it to go on to the next line of code, which is in this case reset the game. Okay, that's good because it means that it's going to stay there like this as player 1 wins until I hit the button again, and then it will reset like so. Okay, yes?
So if we wanted confetti to be going while splashes, we kind of put it.
No, I think what we would have to do is, where is the confetti? I think we would have to put that like before we splash it so that it's going when the splashing occurs. So let's test that. Oh, okay, actually there is one other way to do that, which is this game over block. If you set that to win, I think it automatically includes the confetti. So let's see if it works this way, though. It didn't do. Oh, yeah, it did, but it was just, it got interrupted by the game over. So okay, so let's instead say, well, let's see what we could do. There's probably a way we could do that where maybe it's under info. Yeah, whatever. Okay, but you get the idea, right? Okay, so so this works, except what's the last thing that we haven't dealt with so far? Yeah, what happens if there's a tie, but the game is also like no longer playable? So the reason I make a distinction there is because when the game starts, it's technically in a tie state, right? Because we're not finished playing it yet. A tie really only occurs in tic-tac-toe if no tiles are movable and still nobody has won. Okay, does that make sense? So what we need to do is we need to have another function that just checks, are there still valid moves to be made? And if so, the game's not over. Okay? Well, under what circumstance is there a valid move to be made? How can we check that? If there's a tile in state 0, then then there's still a move to be made, right? Because what did we say tiles state 0 meant? Yeah, state 0 meant that it hadn't been flipped yet. Okay, so if any tile is in state 0, the game's not over. Okay, so we just need to make a function that checks all the tile states to see if they're 0. Now, in a sense, we've actually already done that, because what did we do up here to check whether or not we were overlapping somebody? We went and we made a list of all the different tiles, and then we could check something. Okay? So let me make a new function, and let's sort of copy that idea. Let me put it over here. So I'm going to make a new function, and we'll call this check tie. Okay, and then I'm going to do, let's see, I need to make a list of, where was the list thing? Well, let me just copy it. Okay, so I'm going to copy this and then delete a bunch of stuff. Okay, so what does the green thing do? The blue part of it is going to generate a list of all 9 tiles, okay? And then value will be just sort of a placeholder entry out of that list. And I just want to check, are any of them state 0? Okay? All right, so let's see what we could do. Let's make game state 3 to be that there's a tie. Okay, and the game's over. Okay, so what I can do here is check. Let me make a variable, and I'll just call it temp, and I'm going to set. Under variables, I'm going to set the temp value to be 0. Okay, and then I'm going to check, let's see, we'll do logic if, and then I need an equals comparator. And then I need the sprites. So I want the data object of value, data object called state as a number, and I want to know if that's equal to 0. Okay, so if the thing is of state 0, well, okay, there's a couple ways we could do this. Why don't we do it this way? let's do this. Okay, so let's say that the function sets this temp value to be 3, okay, and actually, you know what? I don't need a temp variable. I can just use the game state variable. Yeah, let's not be stupid. Let's set the game state to 3. And if somebody is in state 0, set the game state back to 0. Okay? So what will happen when this runs? It's going to set the game state to 3, then check every tile, and if any of them are in state 0, it's going to set the game state to 0. And one other thing I'm going to do in loops is, we haven't actually talked about this, I'm going to put a break block in there. Okay, so let's say that I'm checking the tiles and I get to the third one and it's in state 0. Do I need to check any of the rest of them to know that I'm still in a valid game playing mode? No, I don't need to bother, right? So what the break thing does is it forces the loop to terminate early, okay? So it'd be kind of like, you're checking all 9 tiles, but if the third one you get to just so happens to be state 0, that means that there is a tile that's still playable. I don't need to keep checking all the other 6, right? I already know that the game is not over, okay? And so I can quit the loop early, and that's what the break thing does. Okay, and what did we say game state of 0 meant? Still in play, okay? So, yeah. Now, what's going to happen if none of the tiles have state 0? What's going to be the value of game state after this function completes? It'll be 3 because we set it to 3 initially, and the only way it changes from 3 is if one of these if conditions is true. Well, if all 9 of them are not true, then this set game state to 0 never gets executed, and so it stays as game state 3, okay, which we could then check. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so now we just need to call this function, and for that we'll put it, let me scoot this down a little bit. We'll put it here like with our CheckWins, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the function checkTie, okay? And then I'm going to put in another logic thing. So let me do duplicate. I'll put you here. If game state is 3, then what? What happens? It's a stalemate, and we definitely probably wouldn't want the confetti in that case. Okay, all right, so now it should, but then we still want to reset the game. Okay, so let me force a stalemate. Okay. What's wrong?
How would that be a stalemate if there's 3 X's diagonal?
Oh, you're right, there are. Order. We should run this. So the reason that that happened is because we checked tie before we checked win, not after. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to move the check win dudes to be before the check tie, not after. Okay. Okay, that was genuinely a stalemate, yeah? Okay. All right, now let me, how did I do this? Okay, XO, 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 0, and then this was the problem. So if I move there, it should give me a player 1 wins, not a stalemate. And it does. Okay. So it was the order that I called them in that was backwards. Okay. So there we go. Not too bad? Oui ou non? Très bien ou pas bien? Not good?
I didn't know what either of them meant, so
Oh. Yeah, très is an adverb, and it means very, basically. And bien, I mean, I think you guys probably all know what that means. If not, then, well, you have problems. So, yeah. Anyway, okay. So see how we built this up, right? All right. So let me save this thing and then share it so I can put the link to the finished product. Okay, and let me throw this onto Canvas right quick. Okay. And while I'm at it then, let me actually show you the other one. Okay, so we're good there. We did this slightly different in the other class. What we did there to check is that rather than checking first whether the A button is pressed and then whether or not who we were overlapping, we did it in the other order. We said, am I overlapping somebody? And if so, is the button A being pressed? Okay, so that basically saved me from having to do that silly list loop thing, but similar idea. Okay, so most of that's the same, but we just kind of flipped the order here and made it the event be on overlap rather than on A button being pressed. Okay, whatever. Our player win function looked pretty much exactly the same as what we just did. Okay, and I had to copy paste it, and then I did the isDraw function slightly different. There I said, okay, I said instead of starting at 0, I started at 9. I said, okay, there are 9 available tiles to begin with, and if any of them are state 0, then that means that they're available, and if they're different from state 0, they're not available. So then what I did was I checked, okay, how many available tiles are there? If there are 0 available tiles, then that means that they've all been flipped and the game's over. Okay, so just slightly different approach there. And then we put the thing to check who won, we put that in an on-game update, which, now that I think about it, is maybe not the best of choices, because what happens to the on-game update? How often does that run? A lot, okay? And it runs hundreds of times, potentially per second. Well, do I really need to be checking whether or not the player has won that often? In this game, no, okay? In some other game, like a first-person shooter or something, where from one instant to the next, things can change, then yeah, I probably would want to check that. But there's more than one way to do all of this. So so what I checked was, okay, if the available number of tiles is 0, then that means they've all been flipped, and the game ends. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Make sense? So there's, like, if I were to start this over and rewrite everything from scratch, I would probably do half of it the way I did with you guys, and the other half the way I did with them, and kind of hybridize them. Because there's some of the things that I think we did that are more efficient, and other things that are less efficient, and yeah. Okay. All right. So this is the sort of the process that you guys need to be going through, right, when you're working on these projects. Okay. Question, preguntas, Fragen. Good. Well, now you know what the other two words mean too, because they all mean the same thing. So, you guys are probably all too young, but there was a professor here for a long time, Professor Stokes, in French, and he passed away very suddenly, in I think 2015 or so, somewhere in there. Anyway, but he would always say that in class, and I actually took 2 semesters of French from him here. Well, I didn't get credit for it. I just sat in on the class. And he would always say that, and then when he died, I was kind of like, that's kind of a cool catchphrase. I'll steal it. So, anyway. All right, well, I think that's it for what I wanted to do on the game. So I'm going to quit the stream, and then we'll just kind of chat ski for the rest of the time. All right.